So a good story we like to tell that is kind of mindful of historical taxes, et cetera, is one that your clients might be able to relate to. Ronald Reagan, one of our most famous presidents, was also a famous actor, and in the 1920s and when he was acting, or 1940s, it was famous that he would only do one movie per year. And some people are like, well, what was the rationale behind that? Well, it was one of the highest top marginal tax brackets of 94%. So what that meant was Ronald Reagan was famous for telling producers and people that approached him, I'm doing one movie a year. I'm not going to do a second one because the government's going to take all but 6 cents of every dollar that I earn. So talk to me in January. So that resounded with Ronald Reagan, and he was perhaps most well known for his tax cuts and stimulating the economy. So fast forward to when he was president, that kind of life lesson held true, and we saw perhaps some of the lowest tax brackets ever when he was in his presidency.
And you can see that reflected in the 3 R's: when he was born, when he was a famous movie actor, and then when he was in the House. So over to the right, you'll see we posted up the U.S. deficit, and no matter who's in the House, what's going on with the economy, at some point taxes have got to go up because of that deficit being so high.
So from there, now that we've established the tax history, kind of the second section of our famous flyer here is I like to explain as tax diversification. Again, it's on the heels of life insurance as an asset class that has unmatched and unique tax benefits. So we find that our clients always have an overabundance in generally the qualified account. So things like IRAs, 401ks, SEPs, etc. And proportionately on our flyer, you'll see paint bucket lids or circles. And if that were to scale, the qualified account tends to be enormous compared to the other asset classes. So we have a qualified bucket, we have a capital bucket, and we have a tax-free bucket. And with that qualified bucket, if your client were to say, I need $100,000 to spend, and they take $100,000 out of their qualified account, they may only have $60,000 to actually spend due to their income tax bracket. So that is a serious erosion, and as our friends in California will attest to, tax rates are already about 50% for them, and tax rates are going up, so that could be amplified. Similarly, with capital assets, things like closely held businesses, a pure stock portfolio, etc., generally capital gains, a similar phenomenon takes place where we will have, right now, the top bracket is about 23.8% when you factor in all the different capital assets, or taxes I should say, and you can see a similar erosion there. He needs $100,000, he's getting close to 75. On the other hand, kind of the overlooked asset class is the tax-free asset class. Things like Roth IRAs, life insurance, municipal bonds, etc. And when I take $100,000 out of that type of asset, I literally get to spend the full $100,000. Most importantly, I'm immune from future tax rate increases on those types of assets because they're tax-free. So that's extremely powerful to remember as we go through our flyer. So Charles is going to touch on some of the high-level benefits of this asset class, being life insurance.
Yes, and one of the things that I always like to highlight is you'll notice on our flyer that the capital gains tax we have is at 15%. Well, this flyer is only 2 years old. It's already up to 20. So despite of what your client thinks is going to happen with taxes, the train has already left the station. They are going up. So one of the things that we like to use as an example, your client needs $100,000 of income during retirement. So if they take from their qualified and their capital, they're going to owe the IRS somewhere around 20 grand. Well, if they don't have the third bucket that JT just described, when they pull that 20 grand to pay the IRS from their qualified or their capital account, they get to pay tax on it as well. So now we have this vicious cycle depleting your asset pool. So at the very minimum, we need to fulfill that third bucket with enough money to cover the tax on the other two. And that's how you truly get to have tax diversification. Now, in my opinion, and I'm sure JT would agree, the Roth is the best invention that we can invest in, period. The problem is most of our wealthy clients make too much money to put into the Roth. So JT commonly refers to this as a Roth for the wealthy. So we're going to go through some of the attributes of this Roth for the wealthy.
And so some of my favorite ones, we have a list of about 10 or 12, and each advisor is going to explain it or gravitate towards some over the others. But one of the biggest ones that I like to remind clients of is the notion of the upside potential with downside protection. And we'll touch on more of that in a second. But another one that I like is the use it or lose it phenomenon with compared to what? Well, most people put money into a 401k or a qualified account, and if I have a great year, I have no problem putting in 54 grand or whatever the maximum may be at the time. But next year, if I have a bad year and I put in zero, the following year I don't get to double up and put $108,000 in. Whereas with my life insurance design as a retirement plan, generally I have flexibility to double up and fill up the bucket known as life insurance for tax-advantaged growth. Another big one is the government doesn't force your hand with our insurance strategy, meaning things like the 59.5 early withdrawal penalty, RMDs, etc. People generally don't like to have their hand forced. So our design happens to be one of the most flexible where you're in control, you're in the driver's seat of this asset class.
And one of the other ones that I always like to highlight is this income is non-reportable. There's literally not a tax form that's going to be generated from the insurance company that you took this money. So to JT's point, one of the strategies inside of this is using an index account. So it has a floor of 0 and some form of a cap. And in this example, we used a cap of 12%, and we wanted to see how it would perform in the lost decade. And that is the year 2000 to 2010. And JT, if you want to run through how that actually performed.
Sure. So from 2000 to 2010, it was one of the worst 10-year stretches in the market. Clients that had money in the market at $1,000 were generally under $1,000 10 years later, hence the term the lost decade. Now, if we overlay the strategy that Charles mentioned with, say, a 12% cap and a 0% floor, our chart in our flyer will walk a client and you as the advisor through the year-by-year mechanics of how that works. And while this doesn't take into account insurance charges, it really exemplifies the strategy with, as Charles sometimes explains, the guardrails of 12% on the cap, 0% on the floor. And what you see over the course of the 10 years, in one of the worst 10-year stretches in the entire S&P 500, we realized a gain of about 65%, compounded annualized rate of return north of 5% in the worst 10-year stretch ever. Right now, we're at all-time market highs. A lot of times I'll challenge our advisors or our clients and say, what do you think's in store for the next 10 years? Some people are a little bearish and say, I don't know, it might be flat, it might be down. Well, if we were to overlay our strategy with a similar market environment from 2000 to 2010, 5% or a 65% total return, pretty darn powerful. And one of the other things we highlight is the effective yield, the difference between the 65% cumulative growth and being a little bit underwater in the traditional S&P indexed account by itself. And it can be an 87% difference in that short time period. So very powerful to walk your client through the mechanics of this kind of zero is your hero and protecting against market downturns.
This one-pager is appropriate to review with your client on an annual basis and also when you get ready to set up a new account. And one of the things that we like to recommend is to read one of the several books that we recommend for a client so that they can understand this, and then also the follow-up meeting go over the high structure of why do we use life insurance as an asset class.
And in closing, what I love about this strategy and this flyer is it casts an extremely broad and wide net for your client base. It's a great bread and butter, repeatable tool that you can use for someone making $35,000 a year or $500,000 a year. It's a product, it's an asset class that has tremendous tax advantages that appeals to a lot of people, and it can really make a difference in people's retirement.